My name is Celine Harper, and I never imagined the lowest moment of my professional life would unfold under soft jazz music and the clinking of wine glasses. It was supposed to be a celebration. Our department had hit record-breaking numbers that quarter, and Dean, our managing director, had spared no expense booking the city's most expensive rooftop restaurant. The view was breathtaking, all sparkling lights and skyline silhouettes, but I could barely taste my food. I was trying to smile through the tightness in my chest, trying to show up, be gracious, be present. I thought I was holding it together, until Dean raised his glass. He was already tipsy, maybe more than tipsy. His tie loosened, and voice too loud for the mood. He looked straight at me and said it like he was delivering a punchline. "She's too cold to keep a man. That's why she got divorced." The words dropped like a hammer. Every fork paused mid-air. For a second, no one moved. No one even breathed. The table of 20 fell into stunned silence. I felt heat crawl up my neck, settling on my cheeks like fire. I could hear my own heartbeat, and for a moment, I genuinely wondered if I might throw up. Some people stared down at their plates. A few glanced at me quickly, looking away like they'd seen something too private, too ugly. Dean chuckled to himself and took a sip of his wine, clearly proud of his joke. I didn't respond. I couldn't. My throat had closed up, my fingers clenched around my napkin so tightly the fabric tore. I'd survived so many hard moments over the past year, but nothing prepared me for that one. I'd spent the last 3 months trying to move forward after the divorce, trying to prove I could still function, still lead, still be composed. I had told myself it was over, that the worst had passed. But hearing my pain mocked in front of coworkers felt like being cracked wide open again. He knew exactly what he was doing. Dean had a way of smiling as he cut you to pieces, and he liked an audience. This was just another show for him, but for me, it was humiliation stitched together with disbelief. And then the door to the private dining room swung open. A tall man walked in like he belonged there, his stride steady, his charcoal suit perfectly tailored. He scanned the room and locked eyes with me. I barely had time to register the look of familiarity before he crossed the space and leaned down. He kissed me on the cheek. "Sorry I'm late, gorgeous," he said softly. The room froze. Dean nearly choked on his wine. Every eye turned to us, confusion replacing the discomfort, curiosity replacing the silence. I just sat there stunned. Because I knew him. And somehow, that moment, the moment I thought I would shatter, had become something else entirely. For a moment, I thought I was hallucinating. Ethan Granger, CEO of Vanguard Systems. One of our biggest prospective clients was standing beside me like it was the most natural thing in the world. The man I'd met once briefly at an industry conference the month before now kissed my cheek like we were old lovers. I could feel the air shift around the table, a collective intake of breath. Dean's smug expression faltered. His wineglass wobbled in his hand, and he blinked like he was trying to piece together what had just happened. Ethan straightened, smiling at me with warm familiarity. "I hope I'm not interrupting anything too important," he said, glancing casually at the group. His eyes lingered on Dean for half a second before returning to mine. "I spotted you from across the room. Couldn't leave without saying hello." I managed to nod, still caught somewhere between shock and awe. My mind raced to catch up, but my instincts kicked in first. I smiled back. "You always did have impeccable timing," that was the truth. He had no idea he had just handed me a lifeline in the exact moment I needed it, and from the stunned faces around me, especially Dean's, the impact was instant. People began whispering. I saw someone at the far end of the table pull out their phone. Ethan pulled out the chair next to mine without asking and sat down like he'd been invited. Dean opened his mouth, trying to regain control. "Mr. Granger, what a surprise. We didn't expect to see you here tonight." Ethan barely looked at him. "I was hoping to catch Celine before she left. Your proposal for the product integration was brilliant, by the way. I've been meaning to reach out." My spine straightened. I hadn't even known he'd reviewed it. My mind flashed back to the weeks I spent fine-tuning that presentation, staying late, refining every line while trying to hold myself together post-divorce. I'd love to discuss it in more depth. Ethan continued, if you're available for lunch sometime this week. Maybe Wednesday. Something shifted inside me then. The knot of shame and embarrassment started to loosen. I turned to him, smiled genuinely, and said I'd be delighted. Dean looked like someone had pulled the rug out from under him. The color had drained from his face, his usual arrogance flickering under uncertainty. No one was paying attention to his glass anymore. I felt my pulse steady for the first time that night, not because Ethan had swooped in like some fairy tale rescue, but because in a single moment the narrative had changed. I wasn't the woman who got left. I wasn't the joke at the table. I was the professional whose work spoke louder than gossip. Ethan chatted casually with the others for a few minutes before standing again. "I'll let you get back to your dinner," he said, "but I look forward to our meeting, Celine." He nodded, met Dean's eye with cool indifference, then walked out. And just like that, the room was mine again. The hardest part wasn't finding out my husband had cheated. It was realizing the woman he'd been with for 2 years was someone I called my best friend. The betrayal felt surgical, like something had been cut out of me while I was still awake. They didn't even try to deny it. When I confronted them all, I got was silence, and that awful look of pity, like I'd been the one too naive to see it coming. I moved out that same week, packed whatever I could fit into the backseat of my car, and drove away from the life I thought I'd built. The nights that followed were the worst. I couldn't sleep without the weight of anger pressing down on my chest. I replayed everything in my head, wondering what I'd missed, what I could have done differently, even when I knew none of it was mine to fix. But life doesn't pause for heartbreak. Bills still came, deadlines still loomed, and somehow showing up to work became the only place where I felt I had control. I buried myself in reports, strategy meetings, and endless spreadsheets. If I stayed busy enough, maybe the silence at home wouldn't be so loud. People said I bounced back quickly, but they didn't see the nights I cried in the parking garage just to pull myself together before walking in. They didn't know how many times I almost quit, how many mornings I stared at the bathroom mirror just trying to look like someone okay, but somewhere in that routine something changed. I didn't forget what they did. I just started remembering who I was before all of it. Not a wife, not a best friend, just me. And maybe for the first time that was enough. 3 months before the dinner, a department director role opened up. I had been working toward it for years, building a portfolio that spoke louder than any resume. My performance reviews were spotless. My project outcomes consistently ahead of targets, and I'd already been doing half the responsibilities unofficially. I gave that presentation everything I had. Late nights, research, and a 5-year plan that tied directly to company growth. When I finished, the room was quiet, a few board members even nodding with approval. I walked out thinking I had a real shot. But a week later, the announcement went out. The promotion went to Greg Alston, someone I had trained, someone whose reports I still had to revise before they were client ready. Dean called me into his office, shut the door, and told me I lacked executive presence. That phrase stuck with me longer than the rejection itself. Executive presence. What did that even mean? That I didn't flirt? That I didn't laugh at his off-color jokes? Or maybe it was because of what happened 6 months earlier at the holiday party when he cornered me by the bar and asked if I was seeing anyone. I had laughed it off, kept it professional, and politely excused myself. But I saw the way his face changed, the way his voice tightened the next morning in meetings. I didn't say anything. I wanted to believe I was imagining it, that it wasn't personal. But the promotion made it clear. It wasn't about qualifications. It was about control. I had refused him once, and this was his way of reminding me who held the power. I didn't cry after I found out. I just sat at my desk, opened a new folder on my computer, and labeled it documentation. The day after Greg's promotion was announced, I started the file. I didn't tell anyone about it, just a folder buried deep in a locked drive with a password only I knew. At first, it was just a few notes. The time Dean dismissed my proposal only to pitch the same idea a week later as his own. The day he interrupted my presentation 3 times to praise a junior associate who had barely contributed. I didn't add commentary, only facts. Dates, meetings, exact wording, and direct quotes. As the weeks went on, I started noticing a pattern. Every woman who spoke up in meetings was talked over. Every success that had my fingerprints on it somehow ended up under someone else's name. There were discrepancies in client reports, 2 small ones, but consistent. I didn't know what they meant yet, but I logged them. Then Kira approached me. She worked in marketing and had always kept her head down, but she pulled me aside after a Tuesday team huddle. She'd overheard Dean taking credit for a campaign she built from scratch, one he initially called too aggressive. She looked tired and unsure, like she wasn't used to trusting anyone with this kind of thing. I told her what I was doing. 3 days later, James from sales reached out. Same story, different department. Dean had taken his client pitch and repackaged it for a senior meeting, leaving James completely out of the loop. He had screenshots, emails, and timestamps. I added them to the file. By the end of the week, Naomi from accounting quietly handed me a thumb drive. She'd been seeing financial irregularities too. Expense reports with inflated figures, vendor payments that didn't line up. We met after work in the back of a bookstore cafe where she whispered like someone might be listening. None of us said it out loud at first, but we all knew. This wasn't just about being passed over or ignored. Something deeper was happening, something that smelled like rot beneath polished wood. The file wasn't just mine anymore. It had become a living document, a quiet act of resistance. We weren't ready to confront him yet, but we were watching. And this time, we weren't alone. That Saturday, we met at my apartment. I made coffee while the others gathered around my kitchen table, their laptops, open notes, spread out like pieces of a puzzle we were finally ready to solve. The room buzzed with a nervous energy, not fear exactly, but the weight of knowing we were crossing into something bigger than ourselves. We each took turns laying out what we had. Kira showed how Dean had erased her name from project timelines. James walked us through client data that had been manipulated to inflate performance. Naomi had graphs showing irregularities in budget approvals, including vendor invoices signed off by Dean without any oversight. But the pattern didn't stop there. The deeper we looked, the more threads led upward. Certain payments had executive-level authorizations. Some budget gaps had been quietly reallocated under expense codes only accessible by senior leadership. What started as one man's ego was starting to look like a cover for something else. We sat in silence for a moment, letting the realization settle. If we went to HR, this would get buried. Dean had friends. He had protection. And if the corruption reached higher up reporting internally, would just give them a chance to erase the evidence. So we chose another path. We wouldn't go through the chain of command. We'd go around it. Reach out to the people who had real power to hold the company accountable. Major shareholders. Key clients. The ones who couldn't afford to ignore financial misconduct or brand damage. I would be the face of it, not because I wanted to, but because Ethan already knew me. He was the door. The rest of the team would stay in the background, supporting, gathering, and confirming. We'd build a case so strong, so meticulously documented, they wouldn't be able to spin it. It wasn't revenge, it was a strategy. We didn't want chaos. We wanted change. As we finalized the plan, I looked around the room at each of them. No one here was looking to be a hero. We just wanted the truth to matter again. And we were finally ready to make it happen. The quarterly board meeting started like any other. Everyone filed in smiling, exchanging rehearsed greetings, unaware that something very different was about to unfold. Dean walked in last, wearing his favorite navy suit and that smug confidence he always carried like armor. He took his seat at the head of the long table and opened his presentation with practiced charm. He thanked the team, threw out a few industry buzzwords, then launched into a full rundown of departmental accomplishments. When he reached the final slide, his voice swelled with pride. He claimed credit for landing the Vanguard Systems partnership, calling it a breakthrough achievement after years of failed negotiations. He used words like strategic foresight and relationship building and didn't mention my name once. I felt James shift beside me, Kira's hands clenched in her lap. Naomi kept her eyes forward, but her jaw tightened. I waited until he finished and paused for applause. Before anyone could react, I raised my hand. "With your permission," I said calmly, "there's a point of clarification I'd like to make before we move on." The CEO nodded, confused, but open. I turned my laptop toward the projector and clicked to join a video call. Ethan's face appeared on screen, professional and composed. "Good morning," he said. Celine asked if I could briefly clarify how our partnership came to be. The room froze. Ethan explained how he'd met me at an industry event, how we had a meaningful discussion about integration solutions, and how I followed up with a proposal that matched their goals. He stated clearly that he had never spoken to Dean, not once, in any capacity. Dean's face went pale. His voice cracked when he tried to interrupt, insisting there had to be some misunderstanding. But Ethan didn't waver. "I've only worked with Celine. That's the only contact I've had." He signed off with a polite smile, and I closed the laptop. I could feel the air leave the room. Before the CEO could speak, I passed out printed reports to each board member. I said nothing at first, just let them read. The report outlined everything: misattributed projects, discrepancies in financial records, repeated patterns of women being undermined. When I finally spoke, I kept it steady. This isn't about personal frustration. It's about systemic mismanagement that's impacted performance morale and ethics. I laid out the facts. Naomi followed with her findings from accounting. James presented communication records. Kira played the audio of Dean rewriting history in a strategy meeting. Dean tried to shout over us, accused us of conspiring of attacking him because we were bitter. But no one believed it. Not when every claim had documentation. Not when he couldn't answer a single direct question without stumbling. The CEO leaned forward, his expression unreadable. "Thank you, Celine." He turned to Dean, who had gone completely silent. "We'll take it from here. Please step out of the room." Dean hesitated, like he thought someone might still save him. But no one moved. He stood slowly, shoulders slumped, and walked out with the stiffness of a man who knew the door had just closed behind him forever. The silence that followed was heavy, but not tense. It was thoughtful. The CEO looked around the table, then back at me. "The department needs interim leadership during this transition. Would you be willing to step into that role while we evaluate next steps?" I felt my breath catch for just a second. Then I nodded. Yes, I would. For the first time in months, I felt light, not because I had won, but because the truth had finally cut through the noise. And I wasn't alone in the fight anymore. For a brief moment after Dean was escorted out, it felt like we had won. But the feeling didn't last. Naomi was the first to say it out loud. Some of those approvals had to come from higher up. Dean didn't have access to certain expense accounts or vendor authorizations. Someone more powerful had signed off. We started looking at the fine print. Vendor invoices that didn't match project timelines. Travel expenses tied to executives who hadn't been on the road. Naomi traced irregular payments to shell companies listed under names that didn't exist in any supplier database. We dug deeper. It wasn't just Dean. It was the CFO, the Chief Strategy Officer, and at the center of it all was the CEO himself. His name appeared too many times, always just far enough removed to suggest deniability, but always there. Approval signatures, budget shifts, silence in the face of red flags. We knew HR was useless. Legal wouldn't protect us. So we reached higher. Ethan helped us quietly reach out to other CEOs' clients who had also been overcharged or misled. James activated contact in shareholder relations. Kira built a clean visual summary of the data. I started drafting the narrative. Our goal wasn't a scandal, it was clarity. If we were going to take this forward, it had to be bulletproof. One mistake and they'd spin it back on us. So we rehearsed. cross-checked every file, built backups in places no one would think to look. Then came the meeting. It was held off-site in a private room of a quiet hotel downtown. Just 2 board members, 3 major shareholders, and Ethan. I walked in with our final binder heart pounding every step, feeling heavier than the last. I didn't open with anger. I opened with facts. I showed them how funds were moved, how accounts were structured to look clean on paper, but were bleeding cash. I explained how talent had been pushed aside to protect the fraud. I told them how we found it and why we had gone silent for so long. When I finished, no one spoke right away. Then one of the shareholders closed the binder and said, "This goes far beyond mismanagement. This is systemic, criminal." By the end of the hour, they had everything they needed. We left the room not with a sense of triumph, but purpose. We weren't whistleblowers anymore. We were witnesses. And they had no choice but to listen. It happened fast after that meeting. Within 48 hours, the board placed the CEO and 2 other top executives on immediate suspension. By the end of the week, they were gone. No press release, no farewell statements, just escorted out the side entrance while the rest of us got back to work. Our group was reinstated without delay. But it didn't stop there. Each of us received personal apologies from the board, real ones, not rehearsed or polished. They offered me the interim vice president role officially, then asked me to apply for it permanently. I didn't hesitate. A month later, I stood in the same restaurant where it had all started. This time, I wasn't in the corner hiding behind a wine glass. I was at the head of the table, surrounded by the people who had helped me take the truth all the way to the top. Naomi sat on my left, James on my right, and Kira was across from me laughing at something one of our junior analysts said. I raised my glass and kept it simple. To resilience, and to remembering that silence helps no one. The team clinked their glasses together, and for once, I didn't feel the need to hold back. It wasn't about winning. It was about surviving the storm and still standing. Later that night, as I stepped outside for air, I heard a familiar voice call my name. Ethan walked over, his hands in his coat pockets, that quiet smile on his face. He congratulated me not like a man looking for credit, but like someone who understood what the win really meant. We talked for a while, mostly about nothing important. No pressure, no heavy glances. Just 2 people sharing space after everything had been said and done. He asked if I'd like to grab dinner sometime when the dust fully settled. I said yes. As he walked me to my car, I thought about the version of myself who had sat at that table months ago, burning with shame. That woman had no idea she was about to tear down an entire system and rebuild something better in its place. Sometimes the story people tell about you isn't the truth. Sometimes you have to rewrite it with your own voice. And if you're lucky, maybe you find people along the way who remind you how strong it sounds when you finally speak. I didn't just get my job back. I got my voice back. And this time, I planned on using it.